Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 2, and we've seen that God has raised up Moses to be the agent of salvation for his children Israel, to deliver them from slavery in Egypt. Now, in our last session, we looked at the birth of Moses and saw how he was himself saved in an ark, and how God providentially arranged that Moses would be raised, ironically, is it not, in Pharaoh's household, receiving all the training and the instruction of the Egyptians. Perhaps that helped prepare him for the leadership he would one day need, the leadership skills he would need to lead the children of Israel. But now, as we pick up the story, in verse 11 of chapter 2, Moses is grown, and some interesting things begin to happen. Notice in verse 11, it says, one day after Moses had grown up. So now he's an adult now. You know, in our perspective, we would have loved to have some of the childhood stories of Moses growing up in the household of Pharaoh. But that's not the biblical interest. They're just telling us the story of redemption. So we fast forward to Moses as an adult. It says he went out to where his own people were, that is the Israelites. He watched them at their hard labor. Now this speaks well of Moses. Even though he's been raised in Pharaoh's household, apart from the bondage of his children, of the children of Israel, that is, he's still concerned about it, and he goes out to see. So it shows a good heart. He sees their bondage. He notices. He does not overlook it. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that, seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out again, and he saw two Hebrews fighting amongst themselves. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why do you hit your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh, and he went to live in Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now, it's commendable that Moses noticed and wanted to help his fellow Hebrews. But Moses' problem was he tried to do it in his own strength. He tried to take the matter into his own hand. Now, God is going to use Moses. But Moses was running ahead of God. He took matters into his own hands. Listen, if we're going to do the work of God, we have to do it in God's way, by God's means, under God's power. It's always a mistake when we try to run ahead of God and do things in our own wisdom and our own strength. That's what Moses did. He was trying to help, but he did a terrible thing here. And he got himself in horrible trouble. He committed murder. When that is found out, he has to flee, for suddenly Pharaoh's favor is no longer upon him. And Moses finds himself fleeing to the land of Midian. He has to leave Egypt behind. And he thinks, I'm sure, that the rest of his life will be spent in Midian. Now he falls into the household of a priest of Midian and marries one of the daughters of this man and settles down to live there. When his first son is born, he names him Gershom, which means I have become an alien in a foreign land. And so Moses thinks that is going to be the lot of his life, to be an alien in a foreign land. But God is just about ready call Moses to his great work. He's going to call him out of that desert of Midian, send him back to Egypt. This time not in Moses' own strength, but in the power of God to deliver his children Israel from slavery in Egypt. As you get to the end of chapter 2, you read something very, very interesting. It says in verse 23, during this long period, the Israelites groaned in their slavery. They cried out. Their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. So God looked upon the Israelites and was concerned about them. Now, what this paragraph tells us is that the time has now come, the time for the great act of deliverance. And so as we move into chapter 3 in our next session, we're going to see God call Moses to leave Midian behind, to go back to Egypt, and to be that agent of God's saving grace. Oh, it's a wonderful story. Moses' earlier mistake was he tried to do it in his own strength. We can never do God's work in our own strength, only in the power of God. But now, Moses is going to be commissioned by God himself to go in the power of the Lord Almighty, and great things are going to happen. Amen and amen. In our next session, we'll begin to look at chapter 3, how God calls to Moses in that great episode of the burning bush. But we'll save that for our next session. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time in our 5-minute Bible study in the book of the Exodus.